Welcome to supply and demand. Uh, Supply-demand analysis, demand-supply analysis, however you hear it. It's one of the kind of the cornerstones of economics in general. And for microeconomics, I would say it is the cornerstone model that you'll have to know. We spend a lot of time on the initial demand and supply work, but in terms of the importance in understanding microeconomics, it is absolutely crucial. This is the section you must know. The good thing is once you start to go through it, a lot of it is just common sense, but you've got to kind of remember these various common sense items and how once you have three different things changing or two different things changing, how does that affect everything? It is used, so in this course, we'll be using an initial look at supply and demand with some interesting questions. Then also we'll be looking at what happens if you restrict demand and supply. How efficient is demand and supply analysis, or a better way to phrase that is how good are markets? How efficient is a market if left unrestricted or if you restrict it? Later in the course, as far as how we use supply and demand, the firm behavior, right? We'll be looking at what is the demand for a firm's products and how does it change based on what type of market they're in. We'll be looking at demand and supply later to see, when might we see discrimination in a market? All sorts of things you may not have thought economic analysis could be applied to. Demand and supply can give you some really great insights. So a lot of people might, economics is thought of as sometimes as the dismal science. Demand and supply, maybe the initial building blocks aren't the most fun, but you can really do a lot of stuff with these tools. It's really good stuff. So to set this up, when we're looking at our demand and supply, what we'll eventually be looking at is a market, right? Market behavior that's not restricted. The foundation for the way we think about this really comes from Adam Smith. So Adam Smith, he's famous for writing The Wealth of Nations in 1776. What he used to think was fascinating was that back in colonial markets, and obviously none of us have been alive in 1776 markets, so we don't know exactly what they look like, but I kind of imagine something like a farmer's market, right? What Adam Smith thought was fascinating was that you'd have these big markets, all sorts of people would come in to sell their products, all sorts of people would come in to buy products. At the end of the day, the sellers never left with extra products available, right? They sold what they needed to sell. Well, if you just think about that for a second, if you always are selling if you see that the people selling always are selling what they need to sell, you would think what that means is some of the time buyers are getting what they want, but some of the time some buyers don't get enough of the product, right? The sellers are always selling their stuff. You're going to have different numbers of sellers showing up on different days, bringing different numbers of products. So some days there will be a lot, some days there will be a little. Sellers always sell it all. What you would think that would mean, first glance maybe, is that buyers sometimes don't get enough of the product. Now, what Adam Smith thought was fascinating was the fact that that didn't happen either. Sellers never left the day with excess products, but at the end of the day, buyers got what they wanted. Buyers weren't leaving, I wish I could have bought more of this product. They weren't saying that. This is what really helped Adam Smith kind of get this mental framework and thinking, wow, this is amazing that this happens, is what helped get the foundation for the demand and supply analysis that we'll be starting today. He has the famous invisible hand quote. That's Adam Smith. He said that in a market system, people, they act as if they're being pushed by an invisible hand to promote the well-being of society. It's one of the more famous quotes within economics. So the visible hand to promote the well-being of society, that's Adam Smith. A couple of the questions, or the big question we look at in this lesson, how does that happen, right? How can markets for products always seem to have approximately the correct quantity available? And while we start this, I'll ask you to think, how often do you see shortages of products? Right? How often in your daily life is there a shortage of a product? I'm guessing if you've come up with any examples, it's not things that are that commonly purchased, right? How often have you gone to the grocery store and haven't been able to get that product you really wanted to buy? You know, the things I can think of are all almost related to novelty items, or not novelty items, but toys around the holiday season, right? You know, the Nintendo Wii, when it first came out, there were shortages of that. Same with the PlayStation 3. Every year there might be a new Tickle Me Elmo style doll that there's a run on. But you have to think pretty hard to think of when there's shortages. Why does that happen? Demand and supply helps us answer this question. So it's a really good section. It's good stuff, and we're gonna dive right in just a moment. To preface this, you will be using this in the course. This is absolutely crucial. If you're struggling on this, make sure you come get my help right away. Right, I don't mind going through extra problems, working with you in whatever way we need to do it. But it is crucial you get this, right? This is, if you don't have this, the rest of the course is going to be a mess as well. So it is crucial, but it's also useful, right? You'll use it in this course. Like, I mean, it's going to be on the test. You know, there'll be test questions, right? You have to know this just to get through the class. But beyond that, right, demand and supply explain a number of phenomena. It's a really, really useful tool. Okay, so we have demand and supply, right? We're going to start looking at the demand side. So what do we mean by demand? Well, we start with what we say quantity demanded. It's the number of units a consumer's willing and able to buy in your little set time period, given a specific price. So if you give a price, consumer gives you a quantity demanded. Now, what we call a demand schedule is when you provide many different prices, and the consumer will have some different level of quantity demanded at each price. When you put this in a chart format, that's called a demand schedule, right? You may want to buy a different number of slices of pizza if the price is $3 versus if the price is $2, $1, or if they're free, right? You'd have different quantity demanded at those prices, perhaps. If you wrote out a little chart that shows what would be your quantity demanded of pizza at $3, what would be your quantity demanded of pizza at $2, what would be your quantity demanded at $1, and what would be your quantity demanded if that pizza is free, that little chart would be called the demand schedule. So the demand schedule, table or chart format, shows the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded. So we've got an example here. We've got somebody named Helen who likes lattes, right? So at different prices, Helen has different demand for latte. Remember, this is within a given time period, so maybe we'll say it's within a week, right? In a given week, at these various prices, this is how many lattes Helen would demand. What we could see up at the very top, if they're free, Helen wants 16 in a week. If they're $1, it drops a bit. She'll only want 14 now. If it's $2, it drops to 12. At $3, she'd want 10 in a week. $4, $8, $5, $6. And if it's $6, she'd only want 4. So that's a demand schedule. The demand schedule, right, at each one of these points is a quantity demanded, right? When we go back to the definition of quantity demanded, it's the number of units a consumer is willing and able to buy given a specific price. So at $3, the quantity demanded is 10. At $5, the quantity demanded is 6. You put that all together, it's a demand schedule. So both the demand schedule and the quantity demanded, it could be for one person, like what we just had for Helen. Or it could be for a group of consumers, right? Once we get going and we kind of understand these concepts, most of the time we'll be referring to a group of consumers. We'll be looking at, often I like to use the market for, look at Domino's Pizza, right? Kind of conceptualize. Most people have some good idea of how Domino's might work. We would think of all the consumers who would buy from Domino's. But you can do it for just one, and there are times in the class that we'll do it for just one, especially as we set up how to go about thinking about the demand curve. Okay. So we have what's called the law of demand. The law of demand indicates as price goes up, the quantity drops, or vice versa. As the price drops, the quantity increases. Now, when we talk about this, we're talking about the quantity one is willing to purchase. So as price increases, the quantity demanded falls, or as price decreases, the quantity demanded increases. Law of demand, this is one of the, from time to time we'll have these various laws that we've mentioned. This is one that I hope makes a lot of sense, right? As the price drops, a consumer would want to buy more, or as the price increases, the consumer would want to buy less. Should be straightforward, but this is in fact known as the law of demand within economics. Okay, the demand curve. Most of the time when we represent demand in this class, we'll be representing it through the demand curve. What the demand curve is, it's just the demand schedule, but we put it on a graph. Right? We're using a graph instead of simply, instead of the chart or the table format. So for this, what do we assume when we're putting this graph together? We're assuming that the consumer has the choice over how many to buy, but that price is fixed outside of the consumer's control. So this is an assumption that we'll make. Price is exogenous is the term for this. But this fits along with the idea of how did we think about the demand schedule, right? We thought about the quantity demanded and the fact that you tell the consumer a price, they would tell you how much of the product they'd buy, right? Well, here it is. You tell the consumer a price. On the demand curve, you put in the price given to the consumer. The consumer says, oh, it's $3, I'll buy 10 lattes, right? Price is fixed outside the consumer's control, but consumer gets to choose the quantity he or she would buy at any given price. So if price changes, what we'll end up doing is going from one spot on our curve to another spot on the curve.